What do I want to talk about today? So many topics. Maybe how much Hunt has improved over time? Maybe the glow down of Nihility? Are there any other paths that got way better or way worse? Oh, wait a minute. I think I've got something. Erudition is one of the 8 playable paths in Honkai Star Rail, and has historically been one of the worst in the entire game. Many of its characters were released in the early game, when characters were simply considerably worse, and there wasn't much content that favored it to begin with. In a game where most bosses were one-on-one fights, or the enemy encounters were pretty low in number, there wasn't a lot of use for a path that hit every single target on the field for a lower amount of damage, especially compared to somebody like Jing Liu or Dan Hung Il. Erudition wasted away for a while, it felt like, until finally, the prayers of Erudition players everywhere were answered. This relief came in 3 ways. First was Pure Fiction, a game mode focusing entirely on multi-target combat. Second came Amphorius, which has had a greater focus on multiple enemy combat than any other planet so far. This has been reflected in other game modes since entering Amphorius as well, with MOC and Apocalyptic Shadow wanting more AoE-focused characters recently. Last but not least, the greatest Erudition character so far was released. None other than the Herta. The character who fully pulled Erudition from its place at the bottom of the barrel. Hello everyone, my name is Christian, and today, let's talk about the evolution of Erudition. Also, if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing down below. Over 90% of my audience isn't, and as a smaller channel, it really does help out a lot. Alright, back to the video. To truly understand how far Erudition has come, we have to first take a look at its roots and how it got here. Let's go back all the way to version 1.0 of Star Rail, where we had 5 Erudition characters available. These characters were Himiko and Jing Yuan as the 5-star options, and Herta, Serval, and Xingque as the 4 stars present in the game. So what was the focus of these early Erudition characters? Well, the staple of the Erudition path has always been AoE, or multiple target attacks. The reason I can't say entirely AoE is because there was actually quite a lot of variance with Erudition early on, and that's still not even the staple of the path now. It was clear they wanted this to be the multi-target path, but didn't quite commit to it how you would expect with just full AoE abilities. We'll touch more on this later, but yeah, early Erudition really ticks me off. With that ideology now established, we can now take a look at some of these early characters to try and understand them. Let's start with my favorite of the bunch, Himiko. Also arguably, the weirdest of all Erudition characters. Himiko is a fire character, and the main focus of her kit is her follow-up attack. This follow-up attack is linked to charges, and Himiko gains these when enemies are broken. What? I thought the break meta wasn't supposed to start for, let me check my notes here, 10 more updates, but hey, what do I know? If you couldn't tell, this is why Himiko is such a strange character. She does match the general idea of an Erudition, but how she achieves this is wildly different than most other characters. Looking at her kit again, while Erudition has evolved a great deal, so has the game in general. These early game kits are all below average compared to nowadays, even in something as simple as minor traces. Look at Himiko's minor traces. What do you notice? She not only has defense nodes, but not a single crit rate or crit damage node. Pretty unhelpful overall, but this could be a bit more overlooked if the major traces weren't bad as well. Himiko's A2 and A4 are directly correlated to each other, with A2 having a 50% chance to apply burn, and A4 increasing damage to enemies afflicted with burn. There was an interesting thought here considering Himiko wants to break targets, and Fire Break inflicts burn. However, this being 2 of the primary effects of her traces definitely is not the most helpful, especially her A2 specifically just adding a chance to inflict burn. Looking at her A6 on the other hand, this one is at least interesting. Still not interesting in a great way, but interesting nonetheless. Benchmark increases Himiko's crit rate by 15 if she has 80% or more of her max HP. While not the most helpful, this is a somewhat interesting trace that can actually be helpful usually, since if you have a good healer or shielder, Himiko usually won't dip below this when her turn comes around. This does at least mean you won't have to min-max your crit stats quite as much when building her, but when this is the only trace that can be even considered mediocre, that's not a great start for poor Himiko. Naturally, she was still considered a decently strong character at the start of the game, but things changed pretty rapidly in Honkai Star Rail, and Himiko eventually fell into relative obscurity. Let's now move on to characters who were in a worse spot than anyone else. The Erudition 4 stars. Specifically, we're looking at Herta first. Despite all Herta Eidolons being very easily accessible through Simulated Universe, this still wasn't nearly enough to help her in a game that simply didn't care for her or her moveset. Herta is yet another character with a follow-up attack as her primary mechanic, which is triggered anytime any enemy dips below 50% of their health. This follow-up does about 40% of her attack. That's it. Now, I understand. If it hits all enemies, it should be a lower number, right? Well, I would agree if the later character Jade didn't have a follow-up attack that did 120% of her attack to all enemies. This is a 5-star versus 4-star thing, but those numbers are so wildly different, especially since Jade's follow-up attack is way more reliable in almost every single scenario. Let's move on to the rest of Herta's kit to see if there's anything a bit more redeeming in there. Maybe in her Eidolons. Those are all free, so they have to be decent, right? Well, at least they're free. Yeah, alright, so while Herta's Eidolons do objectively help her, and I don't want to make it sound like they don't really offer anything of substantial value except for maybe her second one and the trace level ups. Her 6th Eidolon increasing attack after her ultimate can be helpful since it will hopefully increase the strength of that next follow-up attack as well, but a 25% increase for one turn still isn't anything to ride home about, unfortunately. Similarly to Himiko, the major traces are once again pretty weak and just somewhat confusing for a DPS to have in the current day. Let's start with A4. Herta's chance to resist crowd control debuffs improved by 35%. I mean, that's helpful, I guess? I wouldn't say that's improving a core attribute of the character, or really helping her in her primary role in any way, shape, or form. So really, it isn't helpful at all! The other major traces are okay at best, but make more sense if nothing else. Efficiency increases the damage boost on Herta's skill, which, for reference, increases damage dealt to enemies with more than 50% HP by 20%. This trace boosts that damage by an additional 25%, so still not amazing, but definitely plays into her kit at least. Last but not least is Icing. What are these names, dude? When ultimate is used, deals 20% more damage to frozen enemies. Yeah, that's... You're likely to get some breaks with Herta relentlessly attacking, but this, once again, does almost nothing for her. Also, it only applies for her ultimate. That sucks. I'm calm. I'm okay. I'm calm. As we can see, Herta's moveset is also pretty mediocre, all things considered, and definitely doesn't lend itself to any sort of combat with a lower amount of enemies. Especially elite enemies as well, since it's going to be harder to get their health down, and it's all for a pretty low value follow-up. After having to listen to all of this, I hope you guys are as excited as I am for how they inevitably fix this. At least, I'm hoping they will buff 4 stars as well. On to the next early game 4-star, we're going to be mostly skipping Serval's moveset, since her main difference is she has no follow-up attack in any way, shape, or form, among some other things. Her ult is still capable of hitting all enemies though, and one of her most recommended light cones allows her to increase her ultimate damage and gain it faster at the start of battle. As for those other things I mentioned, Serval actually has a slight focus on DOT, for some goddamn reason. Her ult and skill both have chances to shock enemies, with Serval's 4th Eidolon actually increasing the chance to inflict shock with her ultimate to 100%. This confuses me more than anything else, truth be told. There's no consistency within this path as of right now, and as we're about to see, it doesn't get better. Why do we have a unit with an emphasis on break and a DOT support in the same path, when not all of them even specialize in the exact same type of combat? What makes Hunt the path that it is? There is a clear focus on specifically single target combat. Whether that's good or bad, there's a clear design philosophy there that was committed to. Erudition in these early days simply doesn't display that. This gets exemplified even more with the final character I want to talk about from the early game, Qingque. No Jing Yuan, you might be asking? Well, despite how many problems Jing Yuan has that has had to be repaired with numerous supports, I have no serious problem with him as an Erudition character. He does what they should do in my opinion. He hits all enemies in multiple ways, that being his skill and ultimate. He has a unique mechanic to further his own damage, i.e. the Lightning Lord follow-up attack. And last but not least, and something that I've yet to really focus on, Jing Yuan's ult improves what he's capable of while doing damage to the enemy. We'll see it as we dive into Qingque, But this does seem to be a bit of a trend between Erudition characters, and it especially comes up in the future. Ultimates for most other DPS will do damage, and that's it. You're done. Either that, or the ultimate itself doesn't do damage, but instead enhances or drastically improves your damage output for a few turns. Characters like Qingque and Jing Yuan have their ult do a bit more though. In the case of Jing Yuan, it does good damage to all enemies, but more importantly, increases the amount of hits the Lightning Lord has by 3. So not only is he doing damage right now, but also increasing his damage during his next action with the Lightning Lord. This sort of unique use for ultimate isn't very common, yet we have the other prime example of it in Qingque. Qingque is by far one of the strangest Erudition characters in the game, not only today, but also back in the early days of Star Rail. Qingque has a single move that is AoE, and it's her ultimate. Her skill isn't even capable of doing damage either. Instead, Qingque is a character who loves gambling, and that is especially noticeable in her moveset. Qingque's primary mechanic is trying to get 4 Jade tiles of the same suit. She uses her skill to discard tiles and gain new ones, gaining a 28% damage boost up to 4 times. When she completes a suit, she has her basic attack enhanced to the attack Cherry on Top. This is a blast attack, doing 240% of her attack to a single enemy and 100% to adjacent ones. This all sounds perfectly normal, or maybe even good to most of you, so why would I make the claim that Qingque is strange? Well, what makes Qingque so strange is not her gambling mechanic, although that is pretty weird admittedly, but it was how different in combat she worked from other Erudition characters. As Star Rail advanced, people figured out that an E6 Qingque was extremely powerful in single target combat, and could actually be comparable to or better than Zila at the time. Unlike the other early game characters, Qingque's traces actually kind of help her kit as well. Well, the major ones do at least. Looking at you, defense nodes. Qingque has a major trace that increases her damage even more with every use of skill, and one that restores a skill point once per battle. In combination with her Eidolons, you can actually get another skill point back consistently. You just have to use her enhanced basic attack. She also has that same type of ultimate I made mention of with Jing Yuan. Her ultimate does damage to all enemies, but also gives her 4 tiles of the same suit, meaning she can instantly get her enhanced basic after using her ultimate. All of this combined made Qingque the golden standard for Erudition. Not an Erudition. She didn't really embody most of what these characters were known for, sadly, and was closer to a destruction character in how her primary attack worked. While she was good and did have some similarities, true Erudition just didn't have an identity, and the path suffered greatly as a result. This brings us to the end of the dawn of Erudition. By the time I had begun playing the game, Erudition was already becoming severely outdated. Nobody suggested getting Jing Yuan. Bronya was the best character to get from Standard Banner, with Himiko far behind the likes of Gepard and Clara, and no other Erudition was added from 1.1 to 1.4. Erudition didn't have a place in a game that was increasingly focused on blast and single target damage overall. The Star Rail devs took notice of this and offered players their first form of relief. Down from the heavens came a new game mode in version 1.6, Pure Fiction. Otherwise known as my least favorite game mode, but hey, we don't gotta talk about that right now. This was a mode specifically designed for multi-target units to succeed in, and boy oh boy, did they succeed. We saw the likes of Himiko and Herta, who were sitting unused by most players, shoot up in usage rate. Finally, their talents were appreciated, and in high demand too. The cherry on top was these two specific characters worked perfectly together for Pure Fiction. Herta would help break enemies, Himiko would follow up on them, and then their HP would lower enough for Herta to follow up too. This was a perfect game mode for these types of units, and suddenly, Erudition had finally found a role in the game again, just like that. While they still struggled in something like Memory of Chaos, there was a reason to get AoE attackers again. They were almost essential if you wanted a chance to succeed in this game mode. Luckily for many players, there was a character available right before Pure Fiction released, Argenti. Argenti was the next step in trying to find a consistent design with Erudition, and he was a great step forward in my opinion. He matches the description perfectly of an AoE damage dealer, and he actually gets rewarded for hitting more enemies. Now that's what I'm talking about. Let's dive a bit further into his design now to see how they've improved on the Erudition path. First of all, like previously mentioned, Argenti's ultimate and skill can hit all enemies on the field. His talent, Sublime Object, also pairs extremely well with his multi-target nature. You'll see it on screen now, but For every enemy hit when Argenti uses his basic attack, skill, or ultimate, regenerates Argenti's energy by 3, and grants him a stack of Apotheosis, increasing his crit rate by 2.5%. This effect can stack up to 10 times. I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea if I said that word correctly, I apologize, but moving on. Considering how many early game characters simply had no access to extra crit rate in their kits, this is already a welcome change. However, the additional energy gain is certainly a bit strange, especially when no other Erudition has had this as an effect. Well, that's when we get into the new feature for Argenti, his 2-stage ultimate. Argenti has an option to ult at 90 energy, or at 180 energy. If ulting at 180 energy, his ult goes from mediocre to devastating. Argenti was the first character to ever have this type of ultimate, and to this day, is still the only one it seems. Yunli technically has something similar, but her ultimate doesn't actually change at all. She's just able to stack 2 of them. Back to Argenti though, even his major traces are a bit better than other Erudition, with there seemingly being a trace dedicated to pure fiction usage. His trace Generosity regenerates 2 energy every time a new enemy enters battle. While this can apply to other fights in the overworld or certain bosses, there's definitely a clear place where it will shine. This kit is all around solid, and especially for an Erudition character, really comes closer to what I feel is the ideal balance. A character capable of surviving in single-player content, but also absolutely excelling in AoE-based content with mechanics and abilities suited to it. While still not the final evolution of Erudition, Argenti was a great step forward, and really exemplifies what the path is about. And also all that beauty stuff, I guess, he's about that too, and you know what? He has great hair. Good job, man. With Argenti and Pure Fiction out, all was quiet in Erudition land for quite a while, actually. The next step we see for Erudition took place in version 2.3. Firefly was arriving, and the player base was more excited or hateful than ever before. Every update has 2 halves, though, and the second half of this update was home to Erudition's next big hitter, the IPC executive, Jade. With the fear of being too repetitive, let's skip straight to what makes her unique. First off, Jade's skill is support-oriented. It gives speed, extra damage, and helps her earn stacks for her follow-up attack. Second, she has a follow-up attack. I probably could have mentioned that first, huh? Third, she has an ultimate that does damage and enhances her follow-up attacks by 80%. Overall, Jade's most unique aspect is her skill, and the utility it can add in a dual DPS setup, and her follow-up attack actually being good. The reason I say this specific follow-up is good compared to older follow-ups is how Jade acquires her charges. She will gain charge whenever she hits an enemy, or when the deck collector hits enemies. So just by using her ultimate, you're getting 5 charges off rip if you're in a battle with the max amount of enemies. It's also pretty hard to overcap considering the limit of this is 40. Yeah, Himiko's limit of 3 better get buffed at some point in the future, or I'm throwing hands with someone. Looking at it through this lens now, Jade was another good step for Erudition, but interestingly enough, not in the same direction Argenti took. She still focuses heavily on AoE, as she should, but the designers kept Argenti's ult mechanic unique to him, instead of making it a staple of the path. There was also the reintroduction of a non-damaging skill focused more on buffing. Unlike Qingque though, the buff is for a teammate rather than Jade herself. Well, preferably at least. They also made it so that Jade's basic attack was capable of hitting multiple enemies to compensate for not having a skill that could do it. On top of all this, follow-up attacks and enhanced attacks appear again too. It seems with Jade there was a clear choice to go back to old Erudition characters and heavily improve and modernize their designs, rather than making what Argenti was into the staple of the path. Something that did stick around for Erudition, however, was self-buffs. Both Argenti and Jade are capable of increasing their crit or attack stats by meeting certain conditions. I'm just saying, you might want to keep that in mind for later. With Jade and Argenti out of the way, we can talk about the next, albeit smaller blessing for Erudition, Amphorius. This is going to be a rather short section, but Amphorius has been an Erudition player's paradise. With the release of numerous characters who have blast or some AoE capability, there's been a lot of fights featuring multiple enemies. Most notably of these is Nikador and the Flame Reaver boss fights, requiring taking down excess enemies who are linked to the main boss. With these being the main bosses in the story, they've made appearances in endgame content as well, meaning players still have a chance to use these AoE characters in modes beyond just pure fiction. Once again, mileage may vary on this, but either way, Erudition is once again getting to go further than it ever has. This is far from a big blessing for the evolution of Erudition, but it was important to make note of before our final reason. Beyond just having more of an AoE focus for Amphorius, endgame content is always catered to the newer characters that they release. So remind me, who came out during this time again?
Witness your achievements!
Ah yes, I remember now. Say hello to Erudition's final evolution in today's day and age, the Herta. Now, let's go down the list. Attacks that hit all enemies? Check. Ultimate that does damage and enhances the character or gives them an improved attack? Check. Mechanic that increases crit stats for the character? Check. Yep, that's an Erudition alright, and she is phenomenal to say the least. Also, yes, I know the Herta isn't full AoE. She's just basically full AoE. The Herta feels like the Erudition path perfected. It takes the historical trend of these characters and not only makes it all better, but makes it work beyond just an AoE context. This has a lot to do with some of her major traces, including that crit-based mechanic of the Herta, her major trace, Message from Beyond the Veil. This trace needs another Erudition character in the lineup to activate, and will grant 80% crit damage to everyone on the team. It will also increase stacks of interpretation given to enemies, which the Herta wants to increase her personal damage. The best part of these interpretation stacks is that in single target, they help your damage, and in multiple enemy fights, these stacks will shift to the strongest enemy to ensure they take the most damage. This is a perfect adjustment to the Erudition formula, allowing it to work so well in multiple scenarios instead of being relegated to only certain content types. It's a hard balance to strike, and while the Herta is undeniably an insane character, I truthfully have no issue with it. I know many of you were waiting for me to finally go over the Herta and everything about her greatness, and while that's all true and I could go on for a while, and I probably will in a different video in the future, this ending is more about the struggle of this path and how these developers persisted with trying to find the right direction for it. Through a new content mode, multiple different characters with vastly different designs, and hundreds of videos about how bad Erudition characters were and how they were just massive wastes of time. I know many people are frustrated with what feels like a heavy focus on AoE recently in content, and that's completely fair. However, these are characters and fans of characters who have never gotten this luxury. Their characters finally have a place in the game, and that's something to appreciate. Solo target, break, summon, there will be more chances to shine in the future. Maybe not DOT, sorry DOT, but regardless, Erudition took a long time to get here. The Herta was the missing piece of the puzzle to finally balancing a path that had struggled immensely, and now we can see the next character in Anexa continuing this upwards trend. It may not be the same, but there's an identity here now, and I look forward to seeing the future of not only this path, but all of them in Star Rail. Although, we may be waiting a while for more Erudition. 2 of them within 3 updates? Yeah, they may not be back for a while. Thank you so much for watching my video, I really do appreciate it. This took an immense amount of time and effort, so if you could go down and drop a subscribe if you haven't, it would be greatly appreciated. This is a video I wanted to make for a while, and was a more positive version of a different video I wanted to make initially. With the amount of doom and gloom that surrounds Star Rail just all the time now, positivity is a good thing to have, and I hope this video was something that made that resonate within you. With that said, that's it for today. Plenty of good content coming out soon, so I'll see you guys then. Bye-bye.